beyond extraordinary, something like in that category of having a religious thing. This was just such a stunning thing to witness.
I came across this case by accident. The more I dug into it, the less I could explain. This is not a story. This actually happened. In 1997, a man called into a radio show and said something unbelievable. He had found a hole that had no bottom. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came out of it. Everything seemed normal, just like any other night on the radio. Art Bell was on the air, speaking in that serious, calm tone that was his trademark, talking about lights in the sky, strange phenomena, and unsettling experiences. But nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. Until around dawn, something changed. From the booth, the operator signaled him through the glass. There was a call waiting, just another one, or so it seemed. Art answered, and on the other end he heard a calm voice, yet strangely tense. From that moment on, the show would never be the same. It was 1997, and that man, who, judging by his voice, sounded to be between 50 and 60 years old, didn't want to say too much. He was cautious, choosing his words carefully and avoiding giving his exact location. But he let slip a key detail. He owned several hectares of land in a rural area of Washington, and there, he had found something he couldn't explain. According to him, it all began on an ordinary day as he was walking alone across his land, until he saw it. A perfectly circular hole about 3 meters in diameter, too precise to be natural, as if the earth, rather than forming it, had avoided it. Plants didn't grow on its edges, they surrounded it as if they knew they shouldn't touch it. Mel approached slowly and looked inside. There was only darkness. Absolute blackness with no visible bottom, no reflection, nothing. He stood there for several minutes observing it under the sun, trying to understand what was before him, until he did the most logical thing. He picked up a stone and dropped it inside. He waited. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. But there was no impact, no echo, no background noise. Mel knelt down, brought her head close to the edge and tried to hear something, anything. But at that moment she felt a discomfort that was hard to explain, a strange sensation, as if that place didn't want her there. She jumped to her feet and took several steps back, but it was too late, because when you see something like that, you can't just ignore it. Minutes later, she returned with a bigger rock, the kind you have to lift with both hands. She held it for a moment, took a deep breath, and dropped it into the hole. And again, nothing. That night, Mel couldn't sleep, and the next day she returned, but this time not to observe, but to find out just how deep that hole really was. That hole wasn't something normal. It wasn't a well or just another crack in the ground. To Mel, it was an anomaly, something that shouldn't exist. As the days passed, he started noticing details that disturbed him more and more. He claimed there was something inside that hole, something invisible but present, something that seemed to affect everything around it. Plants wouldn't grow near it, almost as if they were avoiding its edges, and animals simply refused to come close. It was as if nature itself recognized that the place wasn't safe. But the most disturbing moment happened one morning, almost by accident. Mel was listening to the radio like any other day when he decided to walk toward the edge of the hole with the device still in his hand. The moment he got close, the signal changed. The broadcast became unstable, filled with strange static, like something was interfering with it. But it wasn't normal interference. Beneath the noise, sounds began to emerge, voices, fragments of other transmissions. Curious, he started experimenting. He moved closer, then farther away, and every time he approached the hole, the radio reacted the same way. Until one afternoon, something impossible happened. His radio started playing music, but it wasn't modern music. It sounded old, like it came from another era. Confused, he switched stations, searching for something normal, and then he heard a narration. It was a baseball game. Everything seemed normal. until he decided to look into exactly what he was listening to. And that's when his blood ran cold. Because that game wasn't happening in the present. It was being played in 1967, 30 years in the past. When Mel started describing what he had found, something unexpected happened. A few people in town, some much older than him, reacted in a really strange way, almost like they already knew exactly what he was talking about. Little by little, and clearly uncomfortable admitting it, they confessed to something that had apparently been going on for years. People had been sneaking onto Mel's property without permission, not because they wanted to cause trouble, but simply because it was convenient. That pit was the perfect place to get rid of things. Old appliances, ruined tires, broken car parts, bags of trash nobody wanted to take to a landfill. They would just throw it into the hole, and that was it. Gone. To them, it wasn't some terrifying mystery. It was just an easy solution. Quick, cheap, and out of sight. But for Mel, hearing all of this only made the situation feel even more disturbing. Because hidden among all those confessions was one detail that kept coming up again and again. And every time someone mentioned it, the room seemed to go quiet. No one, absolutely no one, could remember ever hearing the sound of something hitting the bottom, not even once. And that meant the hole had spent years, maybe even decades, swallowing everything thrown into it without ever filling up. That was the thought that completely consumed Mel. As the days passed, he couldn't stop thinking about the pit. If anything, his curiosity only got worse, until it turned into an obsession. He kept coming back to it over and over again, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors, friends, or anyone willing to help him figure out what this place really was. Eventually, he decided to take things to another level. With the help of several townspeople, he placed a very unusual order at the local hardware store. He bought every bit of rope they were willing to sell him. Roll after roll, meter after meter, they tied it all together until they had a single line more than 450 meters long. At that point, it was their most serious attempt yet to finally find the bottom. They tied a heavy object to the end and slowly lowered it into the hole. The rope kept uncoiling without resistance, deeper and deeper and deeper still, until eventually the entire rope was gone. But the object never stopped falling. There was no sudden jerk, no impact, no sign of a bottom anywhere below. And in that moment, everyone standing there realized something deeply unsettling. If they hadn't been holding onto the rope, it would have disappeared forever into a void that seemed to have no end. By that point, Mel was no longer just some random caller on the show. He had already spoken with Art Bell before, and his story was starting to spread among listeners. What initially sounded like just another strange late-night tale was beginning to feel different, more serious, more unsettling. But the truly disturbing part came after one of those calls. A few days later, when Mel returned to his property from Ellensburg, he was met with a scene that was impossible to ignore. The access road had been completely blocked off. Armed military personnel were standing around the area, vehicles were everywhere, and there were clear signs that heavy machinery had been brought in. The explanation they gave him sounded simple, almost too simple. They claimed there had been a plane crash on his property, but there was no wreckage, no fire, no smoke, nothing. Even so, they refused to let him enter until the so-called investigation was over. And the more Mel pushed for answers, the more obvious it became that nobody there intended to give him any. As the hours passed, the situation stopped feeling like a normal procedure and started to feel like something else entirely, something hidden. Days later, Mel called into the program again to give an update. But instead of clearing things up, what he revealed only made the mystery even deeper. One neighbor claimed he had actually seen something come out of the hole. It wasn't light, and it wasn't smoke either. He described it as some kind of dark beam rising into the sky, cutting through the clouds, darker than any natural shadow he had ever seen. Mel admitted he hadn't witnessed it himself, but at that point the story fit far too well with everything else happening around that place. And that's when the theories really started to spiral. Listeners from all over the country began calling the show, trying to explain the unexplainable. Some talked about ley lines, invisible energy paths supposedly capable of opening portals to other dimensions. Others believed the hole was some kind of tear in time itself, which would explain why the radio had picked up broadcasts from the past. And then there were the even darker theories. Some people believed that nothing thrown into the hole actually disappeared, that it was ending up somewhere else, another place, another reality, piling up in some unknown location no one could possibly imagine. Art Bell, unable to access the property himself, started investigating on his own by speaking with locals from the area. One elderly man claimed the hole had been there far longer than anyone remembered. According to him, years ago, there had been stone structures surrounding it, almost as if someone had tried to mark the site, or maybe even contain it. But among all the theories and testimonies, one disturbing warning kept coming up over and over again. Some listeners believed Mel had made a terrible mistake, that going on the radio had been a very bad idea, because if they could hear him, then someone else was listening too. The show eventually ended, and Mel agreed to come back in the following days to continue telling his story. But when the time came, he never appeared. He stopped answering calls, and then, without any explanation at all, he simply vanished. In reality, Mel didn't reappear right away. 3 full years went by in complete silence. No phone calls, no interviews, no trace of what had once become one of the most disturbing stories ever told on the show. And when he finally contacted the program again, what he revealed changed the entire scale of the mystery. According to Mel, someone had offered him an enormous amount of money for his property, millions every year, under one condition. He had to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, leave the country immediately, and never come back. And somehow, Mel agreed to it. For a while, he lived in Australia, far away from everything, far away from the hole. But eventually, the distance became too much. He missed his family, his old life, everything he had left behind. So despite being warned not to return, he decided to travel back to the United States, even if only for a short visit. That was when he reconnected with Art Bell and agreed to come back on the show to explain what had happened during all those missing years. Everything was set for his return, but once again, he never showed up. Days later, when contact was finally re-established, Mel sounded different. His story was confusing, fragmented, almost as if pieces were missing. He claimed that on the day he was supposed to appear, he had been traveling by bus to visit a relative. Somewhere along the route, an incident occurred. Police got involved. Passengers were questioned and moved on to another vehicle. And after that, nothing. His memory just stopped there. The next thing he remembered was waking up 12 days later, alone in an alleyway in San Francisco. No money, no belongings, and physical signs that something had happened during those missing days, something he couldn't explain. It was as if that entire period of time had simply been erased, but that wasn't the end of it. Not long after, legal problems started appearing around him. Authorities accused him of building illegal structures on his property, something Mel always denied. According to him, those constructions had never existed while he lived there. By that point, everything had changed completely. The hole, the property, the phone calls, all of it had faded into the background, and Mel Waters chose to remain silent, far away from anything connected to that place. Sometime later, Mel Waters claimed he had been contacted by a Native American tribe. According to him, the meeting wasn't random at all. They already knew who he was, and they knew the entire story. They asked him to travel to Nevada to help with an investigation. They didn't explain much, only the bare minimum. They had discovered another hole, one incredibly similar to the one on his property. But there was one detail, one thing that made Mel realize this wasn't an isolated case, that his hole might not have been the only one, because according to them, that hole didn't have a bottom either. The second hole wasn't located on the tribe's reservation. According to Mel Waters, it was found on public land that had been used for generations by Basque shepherds, families who had settled in that part of the United States back in the 19th century. They claimed the hole had been there for as long as their people could remember, at least 200 years, and they didn't see it as something ordinary. To them, it was a special place, almost sacred. At first glance, it looked very similar to Mel's hole, a little over 8 feet wide, but there was one major difference. While the first hole had a stone rim around it, this one was lined with a metal structure that extended downward into the darkness as far as the eye could see. and the metal itself felt warm, as if something deep inside the hole was constantly radiating heat upward. But the most disturbing part was the silence. When Mel dropped a tool over the edge, everyone waited for the sound of it hitting something below. But there was nothing. No echo, no impact, absolutely nothing at all. That was when the experiments began. The first one seemed simple enough. They lowered a container filled with ice deep into the hole while leaving another sample on the surface as a control. When the ice above ground finally melted, they pulled the container back up from inside the hole. But something was horribly wrong. The ice hadn't melted, but it wasn't frozen either. It wasn't even wet. Instead, it had transformed into something with a strange texture, almost like salt. Confused and desperate to understand what they were looking at, they tried heating it. And that's when something impossible happened. The ice caught fire, and it didn't go out. According to Mel, it kept burning for months. They repeated the experiment several more times. Sometimes the ice behaved completely normally, but other times, it changed again, almost as if something inside the hole was altering its very nature. After that, they decided to attempt something even riskier. For the second experiment, Mel Waters chose to go further than ever before. He placed another order at the town's hardware store and bought multiple lengths of rope, which they tied together one by one until they had a single cord stretching roughly 1,500 feet deep, around 457 meters long. That was when they made a far more dangerous decision. They decided to lower a sheep into the hole. They tied the animal to the rope and slowly began lowering it into the darkness, hoping to observe what would happen down below. Later, when Mel Waters spoke about that moment, his voice sounded different, tighter, almost as if he knew he never should have done it. At first, nothing happened. But once the sheep reached a certain depth, everything changed. A violent tug suddenly jerked the rope downward, followed by a series of heavy vibrations that traveled straight through their hands. The men looked at each other in silence, nobody saying a word, and immediately started pulling the rope back up, carefully, but fast. The minutes felt endless. And when they finally brought the animal back to the surface, what they saw barely looked like a sheep anymore. Its body was completely distorted, unrecognizable, as if something inside it had torn it apart from within. Mel described the scene as though the animal's insides had somehow been turned outward. The smell was unbearable, thick with blood and melted fat, so overwhelming that some of the men couldn't even look directly at it. But the worst part still hadn't happened. One of the men, older, more experienced, took a closer look at the body and noticed something strange. The sheep's abdomen was swollen, and there appeared to be some kind of mark across it, almost like a scar. Without hesitating, he grabbed a knife and carefully cut the animal open. What they found inside left everyone completely silent. The sheep had been pregnant, but what was inside it wasn't a lamb. According to Mel Waters and the witnesses there that day, the thing had a different shape entirely, something impossible to compare to any known animal. It didn't look natural, and it definitely didn't belong inside the sheep. It was almost as if something had been placed there during the time they were trying to pull the animal back out of the hole. Overcome by fear, confusion, and panic, they made a decision they would later deeply regret. They threw the sheep's body and whatever had been inside it back into the hole. And with that, two of the only pieces of evidence that might have explained what was really happening down there were gone forever. After that, Mel Waters claimed his life completely changed. Nothing was ever the same again. And just when it seemed like he was finally going to return with proof, recordings, evidence, something tangible, he vanished once more. This time, forever. There's one detail that makes the entire story even more disturbing. Back then, Google Maps didn't exist yet. People couldn't easily verify what Mel was saying. But there was TerraServer, an old satellite imagery service that showed aerial views of land across the United States. Some listeners from the radio show decided to search for the exact location Mel had described, and somehow, they found it. But instead of seeing normal terrain, they discovered something strange, a completely white square. The entire area appeared to be erased. Skeptics quickly argued that Mel must have seen the censored image beforehand and simply built the story around it. And honestly, that explanation sounds reasonable, until you run into one major problem. TerraServer launched 6 months after Mel's very first phone call. So then the question becomes, how did he point to the exact location of something nobody was even supposed to be able to see yet? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and share it. And if you want, you can also suggest a disturbing or mysterious topic down in the comments for my next video. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, we may have only seen the beginning.